Jessie sat across from me, her gaze fixed somewhere far beyond the room. "It's like he's not even there anymore," she began, her voice soft but heavy. "He comes home, drops his bag, and sits on the couch. No words, no eye contact, nothing. I ask him how his day was, and he just shrugs. That's it. That's all I get." Her fingers fidgeted with the hem of her sleeve as she continued. "I thought maybe he needed time to process everything, you know. I mean, it's a lot. The debt, the tickets, Mark, he's probably overwhelmed. So, I didn't push. I just waited. I figured he'd talk when he was ready." Her shoulders sagged, the weight of unspoken fears pulling her down. "But it's been days, and he hasn't said a word. He eats dinner in silence, goes to bed early, and leaves for work before we even wake up. I've been throwing myself into chores, trying to keep the house running, but it's exhausting. And the worst part is, I'm scared to bring it up. What if I say the wrong thing? What if I make it worse?" Jessie's voice cracked, and she paused, her eyes glistening. "Sometimes, I think he blames me for all of this, even though I don't know how I could have stopped it. But I can't ask him, I can't even look at him without feeling like I've already failed." If you've ever found yourself stuck in a silence that feels impossible to break, I'd love to hear your story. Leave a comment below, your experiences might help someone else find their way through. Jessie shifted uncomfortably, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "Every day felt the same," she began. "He'd come home, barely nod in my direction, and just disappear into himself. I'd try to act normal, cleaning, cooking, playing with our son, but it was like walking through a fog. No matter what I did, I couldn't shake this heavy silence hanging over us." Her voice grew quieter. "I kept telling myself he just needed more time, that maybe he'd snap out of it if I gave him space. So, I stayed busy. I scrubbed the floors, organized the pantry, anything to avoid sitting still. But the truth is, I wasn't just giving him space. I was afraid. I didn't know what to say or how to help him, so I just waited. And with every passing day, it got harder to believe he'd ever talk to me again." Jessie's gaze dropped to the floor, and her voice wavered. "I hate myself for not trying harder. But I also hate that I'm the one who feels guilty, like it's my fault we're stuck here. I mean, how do you fix something when the person you love won't even meet you halfway? If you've ever struggled to bridge the gap in a relationship, I'd love to hear how you handled it. Drop your thoughts in the comments, your insights could mean the world to someone feeling stuck." Jessie's voice was quieter now, as though the weight of her words might shatter the fragile silence she was describing. "The days just started blending together," she said. "Every morning, I'd wake up thinking, maybe today he'll say something. Maybe today he'll look at me like he used to. But he didn't. He'd come home from work, shoulders slumped, eyes distant, and sit in the same spot on the couch. It was like he'd given up on everything, including us." Her hands tightened around the edge of the chair. I wanted to ask him what he was thinking, how he was feeling, but I didn't know where to start. I was scared he'd shut me down, or worse, that he'd finally tell me he didn't care anymore. So, I stayed quiet. I kept cleaning, cooking, taking care of our son, like nothing was wrong. But everything was wrong. And the silence, it was unbearable. It wasn't just between us anymore. It was in me too. Jessie's eyes filled with tears, and she blinked quickly, trying to hold them back. I started wondering if this was it. If we were just going to keep living like this, pretending the cracks weren't getting bigger. I kept thinking, if I wait long enough, maybe he'll fix it. Maybe he'll come back. But deep down, I knew he wasn't coming back. Not on his own. If you've ever been caught in a silence that feels impossible to break, I'd love to hear your story. Sharing might just help someone else find the courage to take that first step. Jessie's hands trembled slightly as she spoke, her words deliberate and slow. The deadline was getting closer, and I could feel it in every part of me. I'd sit at the table late at night, staring at the numbers, trying to figure out how we were going to come up with the money. I thought about asking my parents, but what would I even say? John spent everything on lottery tickets, and now we owe $5,000 to our neighbor. It wasn't just embarrassing, it felt hopeless. Her voice wavered, but she pressed on. I kept telling myself something would happen. Maybe he'd find a way. Maybe I'd wake up one morning and everything would be fixed. I even started convincing myself Mark might give us more time, that he'd understand. But deep down, I knew I was lying to myself. I just didn't want to admit how bad things really were. Jessie looked away, her jaw tightening. I wanted to believe in him, in us. I really did. But as the days passed, I realized the only thing changing was the number of hours left before the debt came due. If you've ever found yourself holding on to hope when everything felt impossible, I'd love to hear how you kept going. Drop a comment below, your story might inspire someone else to keep believing. Jessie leaned forward, her voice trembling as she continued. The day came faster than I thought it would. Mark showed up that afternoon, standing on the porch like he was just stopping by for coffee. But I knew why he was there. I was ready to plead, to ask him for more time, to do whatever it took to keep things from falling apart. I didn't even get the chance. She hesitated, her hands clutching the edge of her seat. He said he understood how tough things were for us. That he could help, but only if I agreed to something. At first, I didn't understand what he meant. But then he said it outright, like it was the most normal thing in the world. He wanted me. Not money, not a promise, me. As if I was just another thing he could trade for. Jessie's breath hitched, and her face hardened. I slammed the door in his face, but I felt sick. I wanted to scream at John, to tell him what his choices had done to us. But he was at work, oblivious to what I was dealing with. And I didn't know if telling him would make anything better, or if it would destroy us completely. She looked at me, her eyes wide with desperation. How do you even begin to fix something like this? Have you ever faced a moment where someone crossed a line you thought was unthinkable? I'd love to hear how you handled it. Share your story below, it might give someone else the courage to stand their ground.